Hi, and welcome to another Flutter tutorial. And today we're going to look into shared preference. So what is basically shared preference? So shared preference, basically one of the um, method available that allow for our application to store user preference. For example, we have the following login screen. So the screen consists of email and password. So typically in any login, user are allowed to store their preference so that they don't have to re-enter their email and password all over again. And this basically um, a process of user having to enter their password and email manually. So for example, here what we have, there's a checkbox at the bottom down here. So when user click on this checkbox, so the preference or the email and password automatically remove. And when we have user enter their password, email and password, and with remember me, when they click on the checkbox, the preference basically start. And when user go back and then try to access the login page again, the preference or the user preference basically automatically load into the page. So how do we achieve this in Flutter? So in Flutter, there's what we call as a preference dependencies that we can use to achieve that. So you can access the one of the topics available in my books called shared preference. All right, so this preference basically a library that we can retrieve from PubDev, and we can go to the library here, and then we can continue with the installation. You can install through through the Flutter pub at shared preference, and then import the shared preference into your project. Okay, so to implement that into your project, let us access a login page. So this is the class that handle the following login screen. So what we have here is basically the following checkbox. And the implementation for shared preference, basically when user click on this checkbox. So we need to go to the checkbox, which is available in this row widget. So the checkbox widget consists of on-change parameter that implement the operation. So the on-change method here will pass a value which is either true or false, which indicate either user press on the checkbox or not. So the if statement here, this is basically just to check for the validation. So to implement the form validation that we use in the page here. So the login form use the form key and then with a validation to make sure that user enter their email and also password before we proceed to store the preference. And then we have the save remove preference method that pass the value either true or false. So if the form here fully satisfied, the user properly enter the email. So let me just use email with password. So that's basically satisfy the the validation. Um, it basically pass the status or the value of the checkbox here to the save remove preference method, which is available at the bottom down here. So what we have in this save remove preference is basically an asynchronous type method, which first will get email and password from the text editing controller, and then create a preference object, which is implemented through the following code. So the preference object is basically a shared preference get instance method that implement all the shared preference operation. So the if value that we have here, either the checkbox is being clicked or unclicked, basically pass to the value. And if the value is true, means that user click on this checkbox, the following statement will be executed. So the value true, where user click on this checkbox, so what will happen is that the preference object, this object here, will use set string to store a key value pair. And this here will basically responsible to store email, following to store password, and the third one here we use what we call as a set bool, which is we want to store boolean value. And then the value that we'll store is the value that is being passed through save remove preference. And these three instructions here allow for the application to store preference into application directory. And the scaffold here, this is just for the snack bar to appear at the bottom. So if you click on this, you can see the snack bar pop up from the bottom, which indicate the preference successfully stored. However, if user unclick the checkbox here, the else statement will be executed, which basically to remove the preference. So the way that we remove the preference is just set the key value pair that we set before to an empty value, and the set boolean, remember, set to false. And then we just to clear the text field here, we just set the controller to empty, both controllers to empty. And finally, we just show a snack bar to pop up message preference remove. So if I click on this, and what happens is that the second else statement is being called. So that's basically how we save and remove preference. So whenever user click or unclick on this, it basically allow for the application to store or remove preference. So let me try again. Click on the remember me, the preference store. So that's basically for both operation, to store and to remove preference. To load the preference means that whenever user go out and then access the page again, we wanted to be able to load the preference. So that's basically implemented through the init state method, override method that we have here. So the init state basically called through the stateful widget. And then we can have the init state where we can implement the load preference method. So the following load preference method basically just trying to load the preference and then get all the preference display back to the form here. So as we can see, load preference, again, this is an asynchronous method. We create another preference object, and we get the preference through the preference object get string with the key. The question mark here, this just to indicate that if there's nothing, for example, like when we first load the preference, there's no preference set for this yet. So this is just an if statement to indicate that if there's a no this, we just use an empty string. This goes the same with password. If there's no this, we set this to an empty password. And also for the is check that responsible for the click operation here. So is check, we automatically assign to the value that we get from the preference RAM. So this is for remember me. And if there's nothing here, choose false by default. And then just to populate our text field, we check if the is check is true. We set both of the controllers to email and password. And then finally refresh the UI through set state. And then it will automatically refresh and show the value that we get from the preference. So every time we access the page again, the preference will always be there. And then if we remove the preference and we try to go back and then log in again, so the preference no longer there, which user will have to enter again. So that's basically how the shared preference is being used in the BookBytes application. So I hope that you can use that as a reference, and then you can go to my GitHub page and to look at the example that the project that I already pushed to the GitHub to my GitHub. All right, so that's all for now. Thank you.